Through the creation of our mesocosm, we took into account our understanding of ecological pyramids by acknowledging the combined methods of feeding. For example, we took into account heterotrophy, which is defined as organisms which derive energy from other living organisms, which in our experiment would be the fish. Additionally, we took into account autotrophy, which is defined as organisms which produce their own food from organic molecules, and in this experiment, it would be the kale plants. Thus, we organized the trophic levels for the formation of an ecosystem within our mesocosm. Our plan for when our plants are nutrient deficient will be to clean the tank and make sure the plants are not being over or underwatered. To accomplish this, if they're underwatered, we will take out the rocks to allow more water to be absorbed by the roots. If the plant is overwatered, we would take the plant out of the tank and add more rocks to prevent the absorption of too much water. Since we are not sure if the artificial preservatives in our foods are causing diseases like diabetes and obesity, it would be beneficial that we grow foods in an aquaponics system to naturally produce organic, healthy foods. With the implementation of our system, in our community these foods would be organic and low or free of preservatives or artificial chemicals, which would contribute to a healthier lifestyle and thus reduce obesity and other weight-related diseases.
While designing our ecosystem, we had to take into account the interaction between the plants, animals, and other organisms. This interaction can be modeled in our ecosystem by the relationship between producers and consumers. The kale represents the producers, and the fish represents the consumers. The kale and the fish interact with each other in that they depend on each other for essential nutrients. For example, the phosphorus and nitrogen that is found in the defecation of the fish supplies the nutrients that the kale needs in order to grow effectively. These nutrients are recycled by the food chains. The kale absorbs the nutrients, which in turn makes the water cleaner and healthier for the fish. Nutrient recycling is important because it affects the sustainability of an ecosystem. We wanted to make sure that we could create an ecosystem that was sustainable by controlling some crucial factors. These include nutrient availability, detoxification of waste, and energy availability. The nutrient availability is apparent through the nutrients that is recycled in our food chain, and the detoxification of waste is modeled by the excretion of the fish. In an ideal ecosystem, the energy is always available from the sun and is not recycled. This is modeled by our light source, which provides constant energy. While designing our ecosystem, we had to take into account the factors that could affect the distribution and density of our plant species, being kale. For example, there could have been a lack of nutrients for the plants. Inconsistent lighting could result in inefficient growth, and water intake had to be regulated to ensure that the kale was getting enough water to carry out photosynthesis. Another factor was lack of root space. Our design had to properly fit in the roots of the kale. If it was too small, then the roots wouldn't have enough room to properly grow, and if it was too rocky, it could cause a disturbance in the growth as well. We also needed space for the water to flow to the roots and punch holes into the container at a suitable size to ensure that the water flows naturally but not overwatering the plant. Water was an ideal medium for our aquaponics system because it allowed for copious processes to occur, such as photosynthesis and plant growth. Water is an essential factor in photosynthesis and helping the plants create glucose. But water is also essential for the fish, as it is their habitat. Water also serves as a basis of transfer for the nutrients from the fish to the plants.
There are many controllable factors that can increase food production through photosynthesis. This occurs through increasing the rate of photosynthesis. Increasing carbon dioxide, light intensity, and temperature all increase the rate of photosynthesis. An increased amount of carbon dioxide increases carbon fixation, which then increases the rate of photosynthesis. However, there is a certain point in which that rate plateaus. Increased light intensity also increases the rate of photosynthesis. By increasing the amount of light This also increases the rate of hydrolysis, or breaking down water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen molecules. Just like carbon dioxide, there is a point in which the amount of light intensity does plateau. Lastly, temperature also affects the rate of photosynthesis. As temperature increases, the molecules in plant cells move faster and collide with each other more, thus increasing the rate of photosynthesis. However, there is a certain point to which, after an optimal temperature, the enzymes in plant cells will denature and therefore will not work. In our ecosystem, in order to promote optimal growth in our ecosystem, we ensured constant CO2 concentration, light intensity, and temperature.
The different populations in our mesocosm interacted in numerous ways. For example, the fish live in a 10-gallon tank filled with water, which provides the fish a habitat and acts as a way to transfer nutrients to the plant. Additionally, the nutrients from the fish's feces are absorbed by the kale, which help keep the water clean enough for the fish to continue to live in. Also, the soil stored nutrients and moisture for the plant to continue to absorb and to grow.
There are three major macromolecules: proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids. Proteins are made up of amino acids held together by peptide bonds and are strung together by ribonucleic acids. When proteins are ingested, they are then digested and broken down by the enzyme pepsin so the body can make its own proteins out of the amino acids. Fish get their protein from the fish food, and the plants get their protein from fish waste, which includes ammonia. Carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. These monosaccharides are made by plants through photosynthesis and are ingested by organisms through food. Carbs can be stored as monosaccharides or polysaccharides, which are larger molecules also known as starches. These plants will make their own carbohydrates through photosynthesis, and fish will ingest it from their food. Lipids are made from excess carbohydrates and are a long-term source of energy. Plants store these fats as oils in their seeds or as waxy substances. Fish obtain lipids from their foods or make them from excess carbs. Plants, after making their own carbohydrates from photosynthesis, turn the excess into long-term storage of lipids. Kale contains protein but little carbs and fat, so humans would receive that when ingesting it.
This picture models are designed for our ecosystem. We have the fish tank with the fish in them, and then we have 2 water jugs that we filled with pebbles, and we put the kale in to grow. The roots of the kale are in contact with the water directly, and so that helps with the transfer of nutrients. And here are some additional pictures of our ecosystem. As you can see, initially we had a lot of nutrients in the tank. Once we cleaned the tank and put the kale in, then it was regulating very nicely and the water was very healthy for the fish.
Our ecosystem will likely not survive very long due to the fact that certain factors of the ecosystem continually failed. For example, we initially had 12 fish. The next day, the fish were either dead or dying. We bought more fish, but then they slowly began to die as well. Another factor of our ecosystem that was not successful was the kale. When we put the kale into the tank, a few days later it began to die and the leaves turned yellow and they started to dry out. Thus, the plant was not obtaining the necessary nutrients in order to be healthy.